Hello, Fred. Thanks for joining us today. My first question would be about to get your thoughts about the disparities that have been highlighted by the fact that so many kids during the lockdown were learning remotely um, and using digital tools, using laptops and iPads and telephones to learn. But those who didn't have access to the internet were left out. What do you think are the long-term implications of that, and what lessons can we take from it now?
Well, I think, as you rightly mentioned, this moment has really revealed the disparities that exist between those who are digitally connected and those who are not. So the implications for this are much broader than just education. I think that this moment has really shown that as we rebuild the world post-COVID, we have to really ensure that we address as much of this digital divide as possible. So that means governments investing a lot more in broadband to make sure that we can close this gap. It means global organizations, those who are giving aid, thinking about how do you actually, really close the digital divide? Because if we can do that, it can really actually accelerate the pace at which education happens. But what it means that in the last year and a half, unfortunately, millions of people who come from poverty across Africa, hundreds of millions around the world, have really regressed in their education.
The pandemic has also caused budget pressures for all governments, including African ones. Are there some interesting innovations that you can point to where governments were able to figure out how to still serve their population?
Well, you see, one of the things that every crisis brings is opportunities. So yes, of course, many governments in Africa and around the world have seen revenues decline, tax collections go down as the general economic activity has dropped. But it also has forced us to think differently about how we do things, right? One of the things I really believe is that constraints drives innovation. And so we're seeing a lot more advances in digital health, digital education. Governments suddenly are having to digitize the services that they offer to their citizens. And so the flip side of the pandemic is that it has accelerated the pace of digital transformation across Africa. I was in Rwanda recently, and the government has had to develop a national registry for COVID. So every person who gets a COVID test has a unique ID that is put on the system, and it's really allowing them to really track what's happening, in healthcare across Africa, across the country. After the pandemic, that system can be expanded for general healthcare purposes to ensure that they can continue to provide digital health across the country and so forth. So there's a lot of innovations like this that have been accelerated by the pandemic, and I think it's up to us now to continue to invest in these innovations to ensure that post-pandemic we can actually rebuild a more equitable world and actually leverage innovation and technology to bring access to services that people have before not had, like education, healthcare, and access to markets, and then so many other things that technology allows us to do now.
And there's a lot of disparities within the continent with regards to access to education, rural versus urban, female versus male. But even for those who can afford the best education that the continent can provide, or even travel internationally to come back, there's still a very big resistance to going into government roles. And as a representative of the Africa Leadership Initiative, I'm just curious to know what you see being done to attract more young people into government to take over from the leadership that we have today.
Well, as you quite rightly pointed out, we cannot transform Africa and achieve our full potential without government. We need some of our best people to go into government. We need world-class human capital to go into government. Now, that being said, I personally do not believe that government should be big. I think that government ultimately should do three things. They need to enforce the rules. Sorry, they need to create the rules, they need to enforce the rules, and then they need to get out of the way to really allow citizens to develop and enterprise to flourish and the creativity of the population to really come to bear. So we need a few people to go into government, a few talented, capable, people with good values who can actually bring world-class leadership to the public sector. And so we, for example, are channeling some of the leaders that we're developing into government. We're also launching an initiative to work with public sector to improve the leadership skills of those who are already in government to ensure that their human capacity improves. But I don't believe that you need a lot of people into government. You need a few excellent people